The Valley of Death. The sister of a woman lost in the Texas flood speaks of faith in times of tragedy. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, May 27th, 2015. President Obama's executive action on immigration reform remains on hold tonight. A federal appeals court refuses to lift a temporary hold on the plan to shield as many as 5 million immigrants from deportation. In November, the president said Congress's lack of action forced him to make sweeping changes on his own. A Texas federal judge blocked the president's plan. 26 states have sued, saying Obama's action is an unconstitutional overreach of presidential power. The White House says its appeal will move forward while the Justice Department reviews yesterday's court opinion. We have Dan Stein, the president of the Federation for American Immigration Reform, and Jean Atkinson, executive director of Catholic Legal Immigration Network. How do each of you see this latest ruling, Dan?
Well, this was an important ruling for the rule of law and the Constitution. The Circuit Court took a look at what was going on in the lower court and said, yes, this injunction needs to remain because it appears to us the president doesn't have the legal authority to give immigration benefits beyond what Congress has authorized by law. President Obama's whole premise was that he knew pretty much what he was doing was illegal, but he didn't think anyone would have standing to stop him. And what the Circuit Court found was that Texas and these other states, 26 states in all, actually do have interests that can be reviewed by a court. And the court also said, most importantly, they thought that the president would lose on the merits because it is Congress, not the executive branch, that decides who may come and under what conditions.
Jean, what do you think?
We are disappointed with the president's ruling, Brian.
The court's ruling.
The court's ruling. We believe that the president does have the authority and, in fact, an obligation, in a sense, to decide how to enforce, prioritize enforcement of immigration issues. This has been happening since the Eisenhower administration, has happened under many presidents, and we are confident that this courts will eventually rule in favor of the administrative actions.
What do you guys think the Republican-controlled Congress can and should do in this case?
Well, it seems like Harry Reid's still running the Senate, but what they can do, of course, is articulate more strongly what the president's obligations are to faithfully carry out the law. Congress directs very clearly Department of Homeland Security to take action when someone's here illegally. Now, what's going on here is confusion between the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security's ability to not take active steps to deport someone because of resource constraints versus giving an actual affirmative benefit, the right to work, access to public benefits. And this is what the Circuit Court said Congress has not allowed and the president does not retain as an inherent authority. If we let stand what President Obama has said, then any president in the future could let in millions and millions of people without statutory authority, give them public benefits at taxpayer expense, the right to work, prejudicing American workers. There would be no limit to the power asserted, and that can't stand.
What do you think is the right plan to take here?
I think Congress needs to take action on comprehensive immigration reform. If they had done this, the president would not have needed to act, and I think it is the Congress's obligation to do that. We know our immigration system needs to be reformed, and it's up to Congress to do that.
With the presidential election looming in 2016, do you think this is going to put pressure for action?
Well, it's going to make it a major issue. Already Hillary Clinton has staked out a very, in our view, extreme position that said I'd go beyond what the president has done, in which we view as actually unconstitutional and upsets the balance of power. You also have presidential candidates on the Republican side who, obviously, as usual, Republicans are split. Jeb Bush says more the merrier. He made all kinds of comments about immigrants being more fertile. And then you have folks like Scott Walker and Marco Rubio. Depending on what day you talk to Marco Rubio, he has a different position, but it's going to be an interesting campaign.
I'm going to give you the last word on this. What do you think?
I think people are watching, and voters are going to be very interested to hear predominantly, again, what the Republicans have to say about this. And they are voting, and they do care.
Jean Atkinson, Catholic Legal Immigration Network. Dan Stein with FAIR, Federation for American Immigration Reform. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, as fierce fighting continues in northern Iraq, we track damage to this ancient land. And Franciscans tap brother son to keep the lights on. Today's May 27th, the feast of St. Augustine of Canterbury, known as the Apostle to the English. Late in the 6th century, he led 40 missionaries to England, eventually converting the king and most of the country. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Iraqi forces charge into the second day of a major offensive trying to recapture key territories from ISIS terrorists. With the goal of taking back the Anbar province, troops have advanced to the edge of Ramadi, the provincial capital. In a neighboring province, Iraqi forces are trying to gain control of a huge oil refinery. They're joining forces with a militia group that helped liberate Tikrit from the Islamic State in March. Dr. Susan Wolfenbarger is a project director at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, been tracking damage from Syrian and Iraqi conflict. How are you able to track this, and what are you seeing?
We have access to a number of high-resolution satellites that are orbiting around the Earth. And these satellites are of sufficient resolution that we can see in very fine detail what's going on the ground. So it lets us look into areas that it's too dangerous for many people to go on the ground and actually see what's happening.
What are you seeing taking place?
Well, we've been monitoring the conflict in Syria since its beginning, and we've seen a lot of damage across the entire country, particularly in some of the cities like Aleppo. We've seen damage to, particularly in the center of Aleppo. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and we've seen massive destruction throughout that entire area. We've seen historic churches, mosques destroyed. A very, very old souk was destroyed. So much damage is happening in the course of this combat and these hostilities that are going on.
Isn't this really unprecedented? Has the world ever seen this kind of mass destruction of history, ancient history?
This is really new for all of us, and to try to document it as it's going on is very difficult and a very new undertaking. And so we're really trying to figure it out as we go along. But the new technologies, having this satellite imagery, is really allowing us to document and keep track of what's going on and to tell the world what's happening in ways that have never been done before.
So as these sites are being wiped out, literally erased from the face of the earth, the data that you're gathering is really the only evidence that it ever existed, at least lasting.
Yes, in many cases, we feel that the documentation that we're doing is really going to provide the information for people once this conflict is over. We want them to be able to see what's happened. For example, we documented the phased destruction of Neba Yunus in Mosul. That's the tomb of the prophet Jonah. And we were able, over just a period of a couple of weeks with satellite imagery, to show basically the site was blown up, and then heavy vehicles were used to then take the rubble from the site, and then earth-moving equipment is used to grade the area flat. So they're literally trying to erase not just the buildings themselves, but the fact that they've ever been there.
So it's a systematic erasing of an entire culture.
In many ways, yes.
Yeah. Is there anything we can do about this?
Well, we're working with a lot of international partners. We're providing information to them about sites that they can't get access to themselves so that they can have more situational awareness. We're also working with some partners to be able to do trainings with people that are actually risking their lives on the ground to try to protect museums and cultural centers and monuments. And so we're doing emergency trainings with them on how to monitor and protect sites.
Very valuable work. Dr. Susan Wolfenbarger, we appreciate you sharing your insight with us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, Britain's first all-conservative government in 2 decades unveils its plans for power today. The speech, which marks the opening of Parliament, is a blend of politics and pomp, with the Queen arriving in a coach pulled by white horses. She then takes her seat on the throne before reading a list of proposed legislation. That list includes a law to hold a referendum on Britain's membership in the European Union.
Alongside this, early legislation will be introduced to provide for an in-out referendum on membership of the European Union before the end of 2017.
It's a ceremony the 89-year-old Queen has enacted 61 previous times during her